This is, I invite His Excellency Minister Riyad Mansour, who is the permanent observer of the state of Palestine to the United Nations. And he'll be talking about the Palestinian affairs and the Biden administration, the status quo versus political engagement. So I invite Dr. Jabbar to say a few words and then proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Madiro. If you don't know him, he is the director of MENA Studies Program. That's Middle East and North Africa Studies Program. My name is Jabbar Rubaidi. I'm the academic director of global programs of the Munich Institute for Global Engagement, Bridgewater State University. It is my privilege and honor to introduce to you our speaker this afternoon, and he is not strange to our campus because he visited our campus and we enjoy really with him sometimes and on the social side with faculty, librarians, and students and staff. Dr. Riyad Mansour was born to a refugee family that lived in the city of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. In 1967, Ambassador Mansour started his college education in the United States. Since his youth, he was always been involved in Palestinian politics and began his career in the Palestinian Diplomatic Service in 1983 at the Permanent Observer Mission of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is known then PLO. So don't be scared from PLO. To the United Nations, he was appointed ambassador and permanent observer of Palestine to the United Nations in 2005. And since 29 November 2012, he has been ambassador and permanent observer to the state of Palestine, hopefully to be officially declared in the near future and on global on the global arena. Dr. Mansour is also the non-resident ambassador of the state of Palestine to Costa Rica and to the Dominican Republic. Dr. Mansour joined the Permanent Observer Mission of the PLO to the United Nations in New York in 1983, as I mentioned, as Deputy Permanent Observer. He represented Palestine in several committees and bodies of the United Nations. In 1994, he joined the private sector, accepting a position as Vice President of the Interim Investment in Corporation Orlando, Florida. His Excellency, our speaker, the ambassador, he got his PhD actually from in philosophy in 1997 from University of Akron, Ohio. It's a really long story, but it's my special privilege to introduce to you our dear speaker, Ambassador Riyad Mansour. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jabbar Al-Ubaidi, friend, professor. And also I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to your university, Bridgewater University, for inviting me to communicate and to dialogue with you for the third time in the span of a number of years. And also I want to thank the Special Department, Middle Eastern and North African Affairs, which I assume that it is the party that is involved in organizing this event. Again, I want to thank you for inviting me to share with your audience some of the important issues related to the question of Palestine and related to the bilateral relationship between the state of Palestine and the new administration in Washington, D.C., the administration of President Biden. It goes without saying that we had difficult years during the time of the administration of President Trump because he deviated radically, and here I'm referring to the Trump administration, from the traditional US policy vis-a-vis the question of Palestine and the relationship with the two parties, Palestine and Israel, and deviated radically from the global consensus established at the United Nations and in the Security Council, which advocated for some time, long time actually, the concept of a two-state solution on the basis of the 1967 borders, with the accepting the principle of some adjustments to the borders to be arrived at through negotiation with parties. But that two-state solution to be based on international law and relevant UN resolutions. And the departing administration of President Trump wanted to replace this global consensus with a one-sided notion that amounts into the negation and elimination of the national aspirations of the Palestinians. So during that period of time, for at least 3 years, we were not in talking or negotiating terms with the departing administration because it accepted the point of view of the extreme rightist government of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, with the election of the new administration, President Biden, we watched very closely their articulation during the campaign and then what they are doing since the inauguration of the president. During the campaign, they articulated the position that they are an advocate of the two-state solution. They wanted to re-engage with both parties, meaning that to include us in the talks, to reopen our representation in Washington, D.C., our office, and to reopen the U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem, which deals with the affairs of the relationship between the Palestinian side and the U.S. administration directly, not as part of the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, and later on, definitely not as part of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. And also that the administration articulated a position during the campaign of renewing the humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians, to continuing to fund significantly UNRWA, which is the UN agency that looks after the Palestine refugees, and to through USAID to help in many ways, including the Gaza Strip in many projects, and also to renew helping 5 hospitals in East Jerusalem, which they are in need of financial help during the time of the COVID-19 and the challenges that we are facing as the rest of humanity in dealing with this pandemic. And then they also added more to these promises. They did not say anything with regard to the unilateral, illegal position of recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and therefore moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in violations of Security Council resolutions in which the different US administrations contributed to adopting these resolutions. So 6 days after the adoption, after the inauguration of President Biden, there was an open session in the Security Council on 26 January. In that meeting, the new administration articulated their position vis-a-vis the question of Palestine. They reiterated the two-state solution, willingness to engage both parties, to reopen representations in Washington and in East Jerusalem, reiterated the position of commitment to the two-state solution, the humanitarian help, paying attention to the plight of the Palestinian refugees, and other issues that they articulated in the 26, including the engagement. In 26th of March, the new ambassador of the United States to the United Nations, Ambassador Linda Greenfield, reiterated similar position, but added a bit more clarification, not only just saying two-state solution, but said two-state solution on the basis of international law, relevant UN resolution, reiterated the position of engagement with both parties officially. Of course, for us, it means us because the engagement with the Israeli side never stopped during all different administrations, including the Trump administration and, of course, the Biden administration. And she announced also the commitment to give $15 million assistance in combating COVID and to help in the food program, particularly in the Gaza Strip. Of course, these are small, modest steps, but steps in the right direction. What we say and what we are saying to them that we need to intensify the engagement, and we need, to see these promises that were given during the campaign to begin the implementation of these promises at a faster pace. Of course, we are aware and we understand the fact that the Trump administration created a lot of problem for the incoming administration, and they are extremely busy with them, including of how to deal with the pandemic and economic ramifications and the stimulus which was, adopted, and issues related, to discrimination against Afro-Americans and Latin Americans, communities of color, and so on and so forth. We are aware of that. We understand that these are top priorities for the incoming administration. But nevertheless, we believe that our issue cannot be put on the side for a long period of time, because we have been waiting for a long period of time for this occupation to end and to see the independence of the state of Palestine. But also we are adding that we need to engage extensively at all levels of experts, middle level of representatives, at a higher level. And through engagement, we will be able to see jointly how we can deal with the easier issues and begin implementing them. For example, the issue of releasing money to UNRWA. It does not require appropriation in Congress because the appropriation took place even from the time of President Trump. But President Trump made an executive order to suspend the disbursement of this appropriation. So if it was done this way, then it could relatively easily be reversed through an executive decision by the current administration to continue disbursement of money to UNRWA, as has been the case during so many different administrations from the time since the inception of the problem of the Palestine refugees. So things of easier nature like that, through serious engagement and discussions, we can begin, seeing that it does not require a lot of time for these programs to be put in place and to be implemented. And through dialogue and discussion, one can find ways of, well, how to deal with the more ambitious issues, such as reinvigorating the quartet, although it has been reinvigorated at the level of the special invoices, because the quartet is formed from 4 different countries: the United States, Russian Federation, European Union, and the United Nations. Because we believe that with the complexities of, the global affairs, no one country can deal with complicated issues alone. Take an example, the pandemic. You know that if everybody is inoculated in the United States and Africa is not inoculated, so nobody is safe until we are all healthy and safe in all corners of the globe. So therefore, you cannot deal with the issues at the WHO and the health issues alone. We have to deal with it in a collective way, globally speaking. The same thing, with climate change. Climate change, not a single country can deal with it alone. It is all of us agreeing on what would be the allowed degrees of the increase of the temperature of Earth. And we did agree in many conferences, including in the Paris Agreement on climate change, not to increase it by more than 1.5%, 1.5 degree centigrade. And we also agreed on how not to use certain forms of energy because it pollutes immensely, such as coal, and to gradually to phase our humanity from fossil fuel energy base into a clean energy base to save Mother Earth. So these issues cannot be dealt with and reach solutions to it through one single country or 2 countries alone. We need to do it collectively. So if that is the case in dealing with complicated issues, then it is the case that we need a collective approach to deal with the Palestine question. The first step in that direction is to reinvigorate the quartet. It's a form of a collective approach. Our preference is an international conference to include, in addition to the quartet, other important players, whether Arab countries, in addition to Palestine and Israel, and other important countries that would help us to reach a peaceful agreement and would help us to guarantee the implementation of the peace agreement. The implementation would require, for example, countries such as Germany, Japan, and others, just only to mention a few, on the question of refugee, for example, which would require compensation that requires, tens of billions of dollars more, that it requires countries that will donate this money, including, of course, countries like Canada. So therefore, if those are going to be needed for the implementation phase of the agreement or the solution, then might as well get them involved from the beginning to guarantee the success in reaching a peace treaty between the parties, and after that, to guarantee the implementation of that peace. So from that, we're saying that we need to reinvigorate the quartet. And we are engaging our American colleagues, we are engaging all members of the quartet to convince them to shift gears and to prepare for the meeting at the ministerial level of the quartet, meaning at the level of Blinken, Lavrov, the foreign minister of the European Union, and the Secretary General of the UN, to prepare well for that meeting, to negotiate a meaningful outcome that will open doors for a political process that will take us to the end of the occupation and implementing the vision of a two-state solution. So these are, the issues that we are talking about, and also we are open for other issues that others would bring to the table to discuss, and that's why we are happy that the new administration of President Biden announced from the beginning that they welcome the engagement with the quartet, with the parties, with the Security Council, with the international community. But now our task is to try to fast track these concepts instead of keeping them as abstract concepts. But when it comes to implementation, we are moving at a very slow pace. I met twice with my colleague, Ambassador Linda Greenfield. She's been with us less than a month. I met with her one time with a group of Arab ambassadors to implement instructions that were given to us by our foreign ministers to engage the international community to reinvigorate quartet. And I met with her bilaterally, dealing with issues related to U.S.-Palestine relationship. And we agreed to continue the engagement, not only to deal with issues related to Palestine U.S. relationship, but also to deal with global issues, since we are diplomats at the United Nations and we have a tall order of issues facing humanity that requires the engagement of all diplomats, certainly diplomats with thorough knowledge and higher degree of influence. And for us, we are active not only on issues related to us, especially after we change our status to a state, although we are an observer state, but we are very active on important formations at the UN. 2 years ago, we led a group of 77 on China, which is the largest group of countries, 134 countries at the United Nations, that deals with 70% of the agenda of the United Nations today, which is the developmental agenda, which more specifically, the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals and the 169 targets that span all issues of importance to humanity, from education, eradication of poverty, food security, climate change, health issues, desertification, ocean affairs, name it, we deal with all these issues, and gender balance, and so on and so forth. So we took upon ourselves to take chairmanship, leadership of such a group, and to deal with these complicated issues with a high degree of responsibility. Meaning we were showing our credentials, not only that we are a state, although our land is under occupation, but a responsible, qualified state to deal with these issues. Or, for example, on issues related to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, not only that we are a member, but we are a very responsible, active member in dealing with complicated issues related to it. And we are proud to say that we were elected to the Bureau for a duration of 2 years. Actually, it's supposed to be 3 years, but we took a responsible position to have three candidates instead of two candidates serving 3 years. So we reached a compromise with countries like South Korea, Japan, and others, Bangladesh one time, to divide the 6 years instead of 3 years or two for each candidate, two candidates, to spread it to three countries for 2 years each one, and to see how to distribute the 2 years. So I am proud to say that we were elected in two consecutive terms as member of the Bureau. I'm just only giving example of how we are shifting gears to act as a responsible state at the United Nations. Although we are not granted our natural and legal right to be a full member state, because if your land is under occupation, that does not mean that you cannot be a member of the United Nations. But the United Nations is structured in such a way that one country that has a permanent seat in the Security Council can sabotage your right to be a member state by casting a veto. We understand that. But we want to show through our conduct that not only we walk like a state and we talk like a state, but we act like a responsible state. Therefore, we are a state. For those who are cynical to politicize that issue and to deprive us from our right to be a state, to maybe to look at our conduct and see how we behave and how we handle global issues in which more than half of the countries at the United Nations cannot do, so that perhaps they can revisit this issue and change their mind with regard to recognizing us as a state. Because to be a state is inherent in the right of people to exercise self-determination. When the United States of America and the 13 colonies decided to be independent as exercising their right to self-determination, they did not negotiate that issue with the Brits, nor they asked them for a permission to do so. And when Israel in May 1948 decided to be an independent country and did that as a form of exercising their right to self-determination, they did not negotiate with anyone, nor they asked permission from anyone to do so. And the state of Palestine is not an exception to the rule. We are like all others who have done it that way. So what I'm saying is that we are at the beginning stages of engagement. We are ready and willing to intensify the engagement to see how we can sift through and remove, if we can, all obstacles before us that were created during the Trump administration, and to work together with the Biden administration with a view and vision of trying to find peaceful solution to this conflict that lasted for too long. In this connection, you can help us. It is it is strange that this new administration, like all other administrations of the United States, which championed the concept of election as a genuine expression of democracy and transparency, the current Biden administration did not issue a statement of welcoming our decisions to have elections, and we will have the first phase of it for the Legislative Council in the occupied territory on the 22nd of May. They have not yet followed almost all major countries and mid-sized countries who welcomed our decision and our presidential decree to have election, and they are quiet on that issue. And in fact, during the time of President George W. Bush, that administration was pressuring us immensely to have the election that we had in the year 2006. And we sincerely hope that our colleagues of the new administration in Washington catch up with this issue and to express respect and support to the decision of the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people who registered to vote in significant numbers in comparison to the last time to express support for that endeavor that is approaching us soon in the 22nd of May. The other aspect is, we are appealing to all countries, including the U.S. administration, and I passed to Secretary of State yesterday a letter from our foreign minister, and we also passed copies of it to the Secretary General of the UN, to the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation and the European Union, to help us with the Israel, the occupying power, not to put obstacles in the path of exercising our right to have our election, including in East Jerusalem. We need help from powerful countries that have relationship and close to Israel to convince them not to put obstacles in the path of our election, particularly in East Jerusalem. So this is where we are. We are eager, ready, and willing to intensify the engagement at all levels to deal with all these issues, the easy ones, the complicated one, the mid-sized one, because this is the nature of the diplomatic relations and contacts. You talk and you negotiate not only the easy things, but all issues, and you try to reach agreements or consensus on how to deal with the easy one, how to implement them, how to deal with the complicated ones, when to implement them, when to deal with them. We are ready and willing to deal with all these issues as fast as our colleagues in Washington are ready, but we do not accept to keep deferring it until we get to the midterm election, and depending on the results, what will happen, and then to wait until 2024 to be busy with the campaign for the election. Then it's not fair to us. It's not fair to peace. It's not fair, to the to populations of the state of Palestine and the state of Israel. We are in urgent need for peace, and we need to have our own slot on the agenda of the new administration to give this issue the time that it deserves and the energy that it requires and the prestige and influence of the US administration and the United States on global issues that can help us move closer to beginning a meaningful political process that will lead us to peace and to peaceful agreement with our neighbors, the Israelis, so that we can begin to open new chapters of peace, development, and security for all peoples in the Middle East, and for definitely the two neighbors, the state of Palestine and the state of Israel. I will stop here so to give your audience a chance to ask questions, and I will be more than happy to respond to them. Again, thank you very much for inviting me and listening. Back to you, Jabbar.
Thank you, Ambassador Mansour, for this informative and comprehensive presentation. And I think I have two questions, and we'll open this to our respectful audience. So you spoke about the effort of engaging the international community and the leaders. What are the efforts from your part to engage the Israeli side in this? Because you are, very close to them and your neighbors. So if you can highlight some of the efforts on individual level from the Palestinian Authority toward the Israeli Authority. The second question, you said that unfortunately the United States has been quiet on the issue of election in May 22nd. Is that just an oversight on their part, or this has some political ramifications? Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll begin with the second question. In the meeting with the ambassador of the United States, the bilateral meeting, she was very much interested in knowing more details about the election. And I was, sharing with her uh, the issues that she raised and addressing the concerns that she raised. I indicated to her that there were efforts using the good offices of the Egyptians of trying to help different components, different Palestinian components, to agree to the elections and the modalities of the elections, which we are conducting, because there will be three-stage elections, one legislative for the component in the occupied territory, be followed in July by presidential election, and to be completed in August by electing the remaining part, the Palestine National Council representative, in which the first part of it would be the 132 elected in May 21, who will be the legislative council in the occupied territory, but they will automatically be members of the Palestine National Council, which is the parliament of all Palestinians in the occupied territory and outside. It is the parliament of the PLO. So I said that the Egyptians help us to remove the obstacles in the path of all political parties to agree to the election, including the modality of the election, which this time will be completely proportional representation, similar to Israel, meaning that you don't vote for the candidate, you vote for the slate, meaning you vote for the political party or group of people who might put together a slate around a certain platform. So you vote for the slate. And you have to reach a certain threshold to be able to be represented in the council. So I said the Egyptians help us through all these issues, and they are helping us to try to bring Hamas and Jihad to be part of the Palestine Liberation. And I reported to her, I'm sure that she reported to Washington, that the two political parties agreed to the platform of the PLO, what the PLO stands for, and to the two-state solution, to international law, to all these issues that might be of concern to any parties, including the US. And then I said, we need help in supporting this process, and we need countries not to wait until they see the results and then they say, because we don't like the results, we don't like the election, we will not deal with the national unity government that will emerge after the election, because that's not fair. You tell me, well, I'll wait to see the election in the United States. If the Democrats win the election, I like that, it's legitimate. If another party wins the election, no, it is not legitimate. Therefore, it was stolen from it. Nobody is taking that seriously. Election is election, and you have to be ready to accept the results, honor it, and deal with whoever wins the election. This is how we deal with Israel. In Israel, over the last 4 elections, and perhaps maybe the 5th one, the trend of having extreme rightist groups is increasing. In Israel, the left is disintegrating and the center is getting small. The right and extreme right is getting big. So we do not choose which party that we will deal with and which parties we will not deal with it. Whatever the Israeli people elect and assemble a government, we have to deal with that government because it is the government of Israel. By the same token, regardless of who will win the election in our side, and all parties are saying we want to establish a national unity government, you cannot come and start imposing conditions that, well, Hamas cannot be part of the government until they meet 1, 2, 3, 4 criteria. This way, if we apply this law to all countries equally, then we will not have relationship between countries. So I was explaining all these things. So perhaps, but it is bizarre that the reason why they are waiting not to welcome the elections, that maybe these are the issues in their mind. But we are ready and willing to engage them if they put their cards on the table. That they have to be upfront with us. If there are issues, tell us. If you have any issue related to the election, tell us so that we can address it and put it behind us. So this is with regard to the election, but we sincerely hope that that election is a good thing. All U.S. administration, any country in Africa, do election, show democracy. Look what they do. That the criticism, for example, to Putin. Why are you renewing? That you want to have 2 more terms. Open elections. Let somebody else be elected. Isn't this what they say? To other countries in all corners of the globe. That should be also the case. The Palestinian situation. Now, with regard to other issues about the talking, first of all, we don't know which government is in place in Israel. They are going through turmoil of elections and elections and elections, and we don't know of a government that is stable and that is ready and willing to engage. And by the way, that when our president came in February of 2020 and addressed the Security Council with regard to advocating for the idea of having an international conference to include everyone in it to deal with our issue. He addressed the issue of negotiations with Israelis. He said, I never said no to an invitation to negotiate. He said, I was invited by the president of the Russian Federation 3 times to negotiate with Netanyahu. And I was one time in my way to Moscow. I was in Warsaw when Netanyahu 3 times said no. So, and he said, I don't, say no to the option of negotiating. It's the other side that is not. And he said, even, if the Israelis are ready and willing, they can, I am here in New York, they can come to New York and we can begin negotiation. So I don't think that it's an issue with us with regard to negotiation. I think it is more of an issue for them, and they try to manage in global public opinion that they want to negotiate, and it's the Palestinian side that doesn't want to do that. That's not true.
Thank you. Any of our audience have a question, please? You can put it in the chat if you don't want to speak, or just go ahead and unmute yourself and fire your question. Yes.
If I may, Jabbar. Thank you, Ambassador Mansour. Appreciate your comprehensive outline of your plans. I have several questions, but let me start with the main one, which is about the regional players who, on the one hand, have great impact in the internal affair of the Palestinians, bureaucracy and administration. Specifically, I'm talking about Iran. And they are not necessarily friendly toward your main project, your main agenda, the two-state solution. In fact, I think there are plenty of examples that they have an agenda to sabotage any effort to establish two states. How you are planning or you deal with that issue? Because among the Middle Eastern countries, Iran is pretty much the only one that expressly and explicitly supports Palestinians. And they have the means to sabotage the project of two-state solution. Thank you.
We have regional players who are very influential. You refer to one, which has some influence with some groups within the Palestinian movement, but they have more influence in Syria and Lebanon and Iraq, for example, and Yemen, for that matter. And also, they are very close to all the Gulf state Arab countries. But there is also Turkey as another regional player, and it has influence within also the Palestinian movement and with some of the Arab countries. But for us as a political movement, from the time of Yasser Arafat, who was known for a slogan saying that we do not interfere in the internal affairs of any country, Arab country or regional country. And by the same token, we do not accept anyone to meddle in our own internal affairs. We believe in the principle of mutual respect and to have arm's length away from everyone. Don't interfere in our relations, and we do not interfere in yours. That's the general principle. But we know that the Middle East is facing, a huge amount of problems. I just mentioned Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Yemen. Then, you had for a while the problems among countries of the Gulf region, and recently they had, reconciliation, which we support, and we are happy that they are doing that, and we wish them, to strengthen it and to sustain it. But we know that when you have all these problems, then you have so many players from the region interfering in these burning issues in the countries that I mentioned. Then you have regional players. Then you have global, powerful players. Everybody is playing in the Middle East. So that is an environment is not conducive to shield us and to make us, 100% safe from interference from some who are capable or have ways of interfering with some segments of your political strata. Just to be very frank and realistic at this. Now, the issue of the two-state solution is not an issue for anyone. This is an issue that the Palestinian people decide on it from before even, the Islamic Republic of Iran came into being. We agreed as Palestinians and political forces within the PLO from 1973 that the two-state solution is the most realistic solution for addressing the Palestine question and allowing for the inalienable national rights of the Palestinian people to be exercised. That is our decision, regardless of those who are sympathetic to it or not in agreement with it. As long as that is the wish of the Palestinian people, that is the only game in town. If the Palestinian people are going to change that configuration, then people should respect that. It's ironic that the extreme right forces within Israel are the ones who are trying to destroy the two-state solution and imposing a one-state reality, which the leaders of the Biden administration, before them the Barack Obama administration, were opposing this one-state reality, not necessarily because of sympathy with the Palestinian position, but more of defense of Israel not to destroy itself from within. Because if you remember, John Kerry's speech, the 67-minute speech or interview, I think it was speech, not an interview, but it was covered by television, all stations, after the adoption of Resolution 2334 in the Security Council in December 2016. His main thesis was, if you keep annexing more and expanding settlements, you are destroying the two-state solution concept. What do you replace it with? You replace it with one-state reality. One-state reality, Israel cannot be democratic and Jewish, mainly Jewish at the same time. It will be an apartheid state. Apartheid state, there is no appetite for humanity to accept a new apartheid state after the elimination of the one that existed in South Africa. So the only way not to allow that option to take place is to separate and to allow for the two-state solution. Now, I know that it is becoming very complicated for that platform to be implemented because of the action of the extreme rightist elements inside Israel. Because the more you expand settlement, the more you annex land, the more difficult you make it for the Palestinian state to be sustained and to be viable and to be contiguous. But the other things that you are also creating, Jews becoming minority between the river and the Mediterranean Sea. That's the new reality we are creating. And the Palestinians will be increasing more and more in number. Then, you allow the minority to control the majority and you call it democratic. It cannot be. And even, and will it be a majority Jewish? No. So then the two concepts, that those who care from the left and the center and the liberal action side, whether among the Jewish community in the United States or globally speaking, then it will not be democratic and it will not be majority Jewish. So they have to decide. So that's regardless of what Iran thinks or what anybody else thinks. The most realistic solution is to separate. So this way we live in dignity and freedom in our own independent state. And Israel will be majority Jewish. And the issue of democracy is up to them to decide. But they can be if they want to. So that these are the issues, I think they are more important than what Iran thinks or doesn't think, although I am not saying that Iran is not a powerful, significant regional player. It is. And Turkey is a significant, powerful player. And Israel is a significant player in that region, which is massively majority Arab nations and Arab people.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Question. Don't shine away. Yes, Mark.
Jabbar, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Ambassador, thank you for coming to Bridgewater, at least virtually. So Dean Alcon and I have led 2 trips to Israel in the past. And on one of the trips, we met with a a shopkeeper in the West Bank. And one of the students asked the shopkeeper, if you had to choose between Israeli control or Palestinian control, what would you choose? And the shopkeeper responded by saying, the Israeli control is occupation, and so I would not choose that. And the Palestinian control is corrupt, and so I would not choose that. And was incredibly, in some ways, hopeless. And so if you were to speak to the shopkeeper, what hope could you give him in this situation?
I can begin by understanding the frustration of this shopkeeper and those who like him. Occupation brought all the miseries for them, including stealing their land and the resources of their land and depriving them from living in freedom and dignity in their own independence. The fact that the Palestinian National Authority has been in power for this long period of time without accomplishing the objectives of reaching sovereign independence and freedom for the state of Palestine is frustrating the population that it is a leadership that did not accomplish its objectives. So it is like being between a hard place and what is it, a rock and a hard place, as well as saying goes. And of course, Israel benefits, the occupying power benefits from this situation. More that it keeps the leadership of the authority not being able to significantly accomplish the task of the end of occupation and independence. It enhances the vision in the minds of the people that it is a failing leadership. The Israeli occupying authority can afford that. They're occupying and they're throwing the responsibility to the continuation of the misery of the people on their own leaders. And by the way, you are professors, I assume some of you are professors of history. If you study the history of all colonial powers, all occupying powers, the most important scenario to them is to try to convince the population that their leaders are responsible for their miseries, not the occupation, not the colonial power, not the outsider. This is coming into play in our case. It's not a surprise thing. I think that, even from the experience of the United States of America, British colonial power, during the time that it was in control, it was shifting the blame, especially during the Revolutionary War, on the revolutionary forces of the 13 colonies. One can think of, for example, Patriot, the movie. Who was responsible for torching all those inside the church? Gibson and his rebel groups who were rebelling against the British, that led to the demise of those that British officer who put them in a church, locked them, got the information from them or from some of them about the location of the revolutionaries, and he torched all of them alive. And there are millions of stories like that one can tell. It's a very ugly situation, frustrating situation. Solution to it, from our perspective, is we need to put an end to occupation. Then it becomes a domestic issue for us, between the people and their leaders, as it is for you. You were fed up with Trump, you elected Biden. But you cannot do that if there was a British colonialism on top of your head. Then that is an issue for the people. You did not like these leaders, why did you elect them again? You have an opportunity to elect others. But of course, this is a complicated philosophical situation. that guy, that person, is living a very difficult situation between two complicated, not promising situations. One is the occupation, which is obvious, and he was honest and told you that. And he was expecting, a different behavior from the Palestinian National Authority. Under no circumstances, the leaders of the authority cannot justify some of them being corrupt. Because if the people are living a difficult situation, you cannot add by trying to live differently than the people. And usually successful leaders are the leaders who are very close to the pain of their people and live like them. And they become popular that way. But if for a period of time become privileged and corrupt and away from the pain of the people that they claim that they represent, I think that their popularity and support would be eroding in the eyes of. These are some of the challenges that the Palestinian people are facing. And in this election, it's an opportunity for them to elect people that are closer to the vision and to the pain.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Ambassador. So now I have a question from Francis Jeffries. Please comment on the danger of nuclear weapons possessed by Israel. Can this be eliminated by negotiations? This is in the chat, so I'm reading from the chat.
Yes, that's a good question. In fact, first of all, because we changed our status, we are a member state party to the NPT. And we are an advocate of having the Middle East as a zone of free from nuclear and mass destruction weapons. By the way, Latin America is one of those zones. Countries came to the conclusion. And we are also in the midst of preparation for a convention to have the Middle East as a free zone from medical weapons. And Israel is the one that is not playing a constructive role in these efforts. They don't want to eliminate their nuclear program, although officially they are not admitting that they have one, but everyone in all corners of the globe, leaders, know very well that Israel is a nuclear weapon. And, the UN, when it came into being and humanity reached the conclusion that we need an organization like the UN to avoid having wars like the first one and the Second World War, in which millions of people were killed in the hands of man. And the UN was supposed to be an instrument to resolve issues peacefully and not to resort to war, to save generations the scourge of war. These are, sentences in the Charter of the UN. So then, after the formation of the UN during the Cold War period, the main issue was disarmament, not to allow nuclear weapons to fester, not to allow countries to have nuclear weapons. Because this time, it's not like the first time and the second time in a span of 100 years. This time, if we have a nuclear war, we would threat humanity from existing on Mother Earth. So it is within our collective interest to eliminate all nuclear weapons, because there will not be a winner if nuclear war takes place. So from our side, we are working very actively on the adoption of this convention, this instrument, and hoping that everyone will be on board. But I can tell you from now, Israel is not interested in this proposal, and that doesn't mean that we will not continue work on it and to have this instrument and to have countries approve it, ratify it, and to decide on how it can come into effect. But this is one of the issues that extremely important to all of us. Even Iran was ready to engage. And during the time of President Barack Obama, there was an agreement of the 6+1. And I believe we are on the initial stages of reviving that agreement, which through peaceful ways, not to allow Iran to have nuclear weapons, and in exchange for Iran to resolve the blockade against it and to minimize the suffering that they go through as a result of continuing, to have the nuclear program. And this is one of the things that the Biden administration promised, that when they win the election, they will go back to the agreement that was reached during the time of President Barack Obama.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Any further questions?
Yeah, dear Ambassador Mansour.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was reading somewhere about Mr. Kushner, who was the son-in-law of ex-President Trump. He was more efficient, and in terms of creating negotiations between Israel and Arab Emirates and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, which was never the case in the past. And therefore, he was more effective as a Middle East peace negotiator than anybody else in the past or even now. So therefore, does that really damage Palestine efforts or anything to do with Palestine in terms of, its progress in having a one-state solution, things like that, or two-state solutions?
Maybe he was effective in having deals with some of these Gulf states.
Yeah.
Who were never, were in war with Israel. That is true. But he failed completely in convincing the international community over the span of 4 years in the Security Council of throwing on the garbage the collective agreement by humanity and the international community on how to solve this conflict, which is basically the same thing that the international community reached in 1947, two-state solution, and with some agreement of how to make Jerusalem the city that is for everyone, although parts of it would be under the control, more or less, of the two states, because it will be the capital of two states. So he came very often to the Security Council, telling everyone, what you're doing is nonsense. It did not work for the last, I don't know how many years. His work will be the one that will solve the problem. He tried, and he did not win a single country to his vision, including the closest to the United States. By that, I mean the UK. I used to go and listen to him. And he comes with the attitude, cavalier attitude, that, you spoil the Palestinians too much. You should starve them. You should make them, kneel on their knees. You should clobber them. You should do all these things. You will see different results. Of course, he doesn't know us. He doesn't know. If you come as a successful real estate agent, you think that everything is a deal, whether you are selling or buying. But that is not the case when it comes to issues of human dignity and human affairs. It seems to me that he did not even study well the history of the United States. He did not study well even what happened in Boston at one time when they threw pallets of tea in the, in the bay, and they said no taxation without representation. Just I'm giving example.
Right.
So if he was so brilliant and so successful, why didn't he succeed in changing the global consensus, which advocates of how to solve Palestine question on the basis of international law and relevant UN resolutions? I admit he succeeded in having relationship between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, okay, and Bahrain. But these two countries never were in war with, with Israel. But it is part of what happened during his time. But I don't think that you can claim that you were successful. You take only one part of the picture and forget the big failure that you had in the major part of the picture, which is resolving the Palestine-Israeli conflict. On his time watch, there were no talks or discussions between the Palestinian side and the Trump administration. And for that matter, there were no relationship with the Israeli occupying authority other than the daily relationship between the occupiers and people who live under occupation. You see the security forces everywhere. You see the checkpoints everywhere. You see that the occupying authority influencing the life of everyone, taking the land, building settlements. That's occupation. That's not asking the Palestinians for a decision to make and to listen to the suggestions of the Palestinians. You are an occupier and you impose your wish as you like over the people that you occupy. So for him, in the fundamental issue, he failed. In the marginal issues, he had some success.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have one minute for last question. Yes, Dr. Medu.
Yeah, I have. I mean, you brought up an interesting viewpoint on the demographic shift within Palestine and Israel. So, just wondering, what is the proportion of the population in the future going to be like, among the Palestinians and also vis-a-vis Israeli?
I missed what is the what?
The population shift, like as you were saying in the past, or I mean the previous conversation about the number of people that Israelis in relation to the number of people, the Palestinians, like birth rate, population growth, and how it is going to impact.
Well, first, it goes without saying that the ratio of growth among Palestinians is much higher among the Jewish population of the state of Israel. Now, of course, in Israel itself, there is close, little bit less than 2 million Palestinian Israelis.
Yeah.
So that they constitute about 20% of the population. And there is another 5% who are not Jews. So 25% of the population of Israel are not Jews. Of course, all of the population of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, with the exception of the settlers, are Palestinian Arabs. So you add those to the close to 2 million Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, then between the river Jordan and the Mediterranean, the population is about the same. We might be the Palestinian Arabs might be 1 or 2% more than the Jewish population in that general area. Now, the projections, maybe by 2030, the ratio might be 40-60 in our paper, and it will increase more. That's the demographic, aspect. Now, the extreme rightist, the settler communities, there is no one that will accept today complete ethnic cleansing. Bring buses and trucks load them with Palestinians and throw them into the desert or throw them into Jordan. Jordan is your state, go there. Even leaders, maybe the most extreme among the Israeli Jewish leaders, would contemplate such possibility. Now, what would they do is like what happened in South Africa, Bantustanization, meaning have island of population areas. The land is for the Jewish settlements. That's why the concept of annexation that was allowed in Kushner's so-called brilliant idea of how to resolve the issue is that for Israel to annex the Jordan Valley, to annex the settlements, to annex East Jerusalem. So this annexation will amount into an additional 30% of the occupied territory. So what does that mean? It means that you will have clusters of Palestinian centers for populations in the cities, in so-called Area A, some of the Area B. And these are isolated Bantustans of Palestinians. The land will be taken by the settlers. So they want the land, they don't want the people. And they cannot expel the people, but they will be in Bantustans. And they will encourage those who can migrate and leave in order to dilute the number of Palestinians. But even inside Israel, that is not happening. And I think that some of the Israeli leaders writing books, they said one of the biggest mistakes of the Zionist movement and the leaders of Israel that they allowed about 200,000 Palestinians to remain inside Israel. Because now they're creating also a problem for them inside Israel. The Galilee, the majority of the population of Israelis there are Palestinian Arabs. The Jews are the minority. So then, you know, what do you do with this situation? You cannot expel them. You cannot eliminate them. You are denying them their national rights. Isn't that, you know, what they did in South Africa? Even our South African friends, when they come and visit today, they visit Palestine, Israel, they are stunned. They said that the apartheid as manifesting itself in this region is much worse than the apartheid that they lived through during, you know, the white minority regime in South Africa. So I don't think that it's creating problem, especially for American Jews who are liberal and who are very active in social justice issues. You know, you can try to justify for Israel as much as you like. But like one of the professors said that he took a group of students and visited. Go and visit and you see two realities. The realities of the occupation, the realities of the settlers, and the deprivation for the Palestinian population. Of course, when you go to Ramallah and you look inside the city itself, with pretending that it exists in a vacuum, you might come to the conclusion that everything is okay here. But this is probably was, if you go to Soweto at that time, in which you're living among hundreds of thousands among blacks, and the security forces of the apartheid regime around the city, inside Soweto, you might think, you know, that everything is okay. Black living among each other and life is unfolding, and the sun rises from the east and sets on the south. But for a nation living in enclaves like that, isolated islands, that was apartheid, and it was a dark chapter in the history of humanity, as the Holocaust was a dark chapter in the history of humanity during its time. So it is not a solution. I think the solution of separating, having an independent state living in peace and harmony with its neighbors, including the state of Israel, it will create different conditions. It will begin a process of creating conditions of treating each other as equal. And you begin from there a process of healing. And who knows what will happen in the future? Look at Germany and France. They were in opposing sides during World War I and World War II. They killed from each other more than what was killed from all previous wars since the beginning of humanity. Then, years later, they came to the conclusion that the option of war and dominance is not the option to pursue. And they are now the two pillars of the European Union. And nothing happens in Europe without the agreement between France and Germany. So who knows if we become independent neighbors, we have tremendous capabilities, the two sides, especially on the human level, that we could do wonders for our peoples and for the region as a whole. But for that to happen, we cannot do it while one is dominating the other one, occupying the other one, and dehumanizing the other one. You begin by accepting each other as equal, respecting each other, and looking in a peaceful, respectful way of how to cooperate on the basis of accepting the legitimate national rights of each one. We've accepted that Israel to be a state, not on what it was allowed to be in 1947 and 48, which is approximately half of Palestine. We accepted that they will be in control of more than 3/4 of Palestine. Our state is only 22% of historic Palestine. But the extreme rightists are pushing the envelope, even that they don't want it to happen. And they are taking the region into a direction which is not congruent with the evolution and the progress of humanity. Say that, well, God gave me the land 3,000 years ago. Still, this is, God is still giving it to you today, 3,000 years ago. Did God give, the land of North America to the Red Indians? As only God, is thinking of only one group of his children and not thinking of the rest of his children. I thought that all of us are the children of God. And he loves all of us. And he forgives us for our sins as we learn from Jesus Christ. So I think for today, we are advocating integration, not segregation. Today, we are advocating living together in harmony, in not discriminating, not selling slaves in the market as we used to do less than 200 years ago or so. These are great things that we did, just to try to clean our act for the evil things that we did against each other in the past. So that is where humanity is taking us forward. It is not taking us back, one dominating the other, using all kinds of excuses, including using, language in holy books, which I respect. And but these things, you practice them in your house, between you and your God. That's your choice. But to try to use it to impose on others, given the authority that God gave you the power to be his representative on earth, this kind of religious politicization of issues will get us in trouble, because that's the accusation against these Islamic fundamentalist groups. They're saying they're saying that God gave them the power to tell us who is righteous and who is the sinner. So if we start accepting the concept there are agents to God on earth then those agents, you cannot argue with them. You are the agent of God. You have the whole truth. The argument is finished before you start. The Enlightenment told us separate. Religion, you keep it in your house or in your church or your temple or your mosque. But the way we deal with each other based on different norms of civil rights, civil liberties, it's a different kind of issues. These are all, by the way, all these ideas are the most important contribution of Western civilizations to humanity. Although people in the East might dispute that they were advocating these things way before Europe and the United States came into being main players in global issues, for example, China. And I would say that during the last 2,000 years, 1,800 years of them, we were the main player, globally speaking. And there was a deviation for 200 years. Now they're doing the correction. That's what the Chinese say. I don't know Chinese language, but you say that they claim that they are the most archived nation in the whole world. And I appeal to all academic institutions, translate all these, archives from China so that we can benefit from what they have for themselves. Because, we are at the level of globalization, which we can benefit from each other, the good things. We don't need the bad things. Anyhow, this is, enough for now, and I will be looking forward, hopefully soon, in visiting your beautiful campus and engaging with you in person.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Ambassador, Dr. Riyad Mansour, for this informative and very frank and friendly and hopeful presentation. And this presentation was sponsored by, of course, the MENA Studies Program and the U.S. Department of Education and the Munich Institute for Global Engagement and its arm, the global programs. Thank you for our audience, and certainly we will hope to hear from you, and please come back to us when we come back to our normal life post the pandemic, because we have a plan to do so. And we appreciate sharing the information with us. And I don't know if Dr. Mediro, you have any closing word, or we just close?
Yeah, we just close, but thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Be well, stay safe. Thank you so much.